This is a magic sword, and I hope I'm broadcasting okay because it's a communications kind of thing. Uh, and I just saw my video thing here kind of flicker like it does when I'm having problems. So if I do, it was the power, the electrical power of the sword that screwed us up this morning. And if not, forget what I just said. This is my magic sword. It's also Constance's priestess sword, or serves us both in that capacity. Uh, I'm going to start off today's thing by showing it to you because uh, at least in our lives, it's a very historic and significant weapon. You see right at the very top there is a knight's helmet there, okay? And it looks like there's a bear on the top, and that, excuse me, California Knights Templar Freemasons, but I'm assuming that that is the characteristic emblem of a California Knights Templar Freemason. Certainly, the rest of the sword is a commander's sword. We got a triangle there superimposed over a cross, very golden dawnish. On the other side there, there's initials. Walter F. Doran was the knight's commander there, this was their personal sword. I bought this sword at an antique store under very uh, profound and mystical circumstances. You see a Knights Templar, their image there, both on both sides. What's really very interesting, I'm going to show some details, and what kind of first drew me to this particular sword. I don't know if this light is going to help. It does a little bit there. We see a knight reclining in front of a conical tent, conical like a crusader, and there's hills and things in the background. He's resting, but in the upper corner there, you see the sun. See the little sun right up there? And the sun has a downward pointing triangle with a cross in it there. There's other emblems. And there is the particular device of the Masonic Knights Templar, the cross in the within a crown. The other side of this is pretty uncharacteristic. It's a beautiful thing. Okay. This is sort of gold. Okay, I don't know what the process is called, but it's highly decorated. There's a cross inside there. Maybe I can get it at an angle. There's a cross inside of a crown. Memento mori. Remember death. And there's a nice Knights Templar standing there. Okay. Another one holding up a banner. And there we have, let's see, is this upside down? Yes, it is. So I'll do it this way. It says Walter F. Doran. Now, if you're the family of Walter F. Doran, I apologize. but I'm doing this very respectfully. And there's other ornamentation. Now on this side, the idea of a conical tent is very important. And the theme of Knights Templar was very important to me when I first saw this sword in an antique store. Now, it's a very common sword. Every Knights Templar of this degree gets one, so everyone's got one in an attic somewhere or another. And I just want to show the galloping knights. Yeah, here they should be here. There they are. More conical tents. Themes from the Crusade. Here's the Knights Templar going off into battle. And on the other side are the Saracens. And there's the big mosque. In a sense, they're fighting each other, but they're both glorified. Anyway, now that I've shown you that, let's talk about the magical sword. In Book 4, Crowley says the magical sword is the analytical faculty attributed to air, all wandering, all penetrating, but unstable. The sword, necessary as it is to the beginner, is but a crude weapon. We don't need to see the ceiling there. Its function is to keep off the enemy or to force a passage through them. And though it must be wielded to gain admission to the palace, it cannot be worn to the wedding feast. Now, the magician's panticle is the first instrument the magician fashions. It's upon that the design that's scratched on the panticle that the magician expresses their view of the universe, their view of themselves. It literally is the blueprint, the foundation upon which the magician stands to start to do his or her magic. So that's the first weapon. Second weapon is the instrument that scratched that design on the panticle, the sword or the dagger. Okay. The panticle is engraved with a symbol that represents the magician's universe. The sword bears a word that represents the magician's universe. This can actually be a word, a noun, a pronoun, verb, adverb, adjective, preposition, conjunction, interjection, or in some language that is meaningful to you. And that word is engraved upon an actual sword, like the name Walter F. Doran is on this antique sword. Or the word of the sword can be a more subtle vibratory expression of your universe than that which can be articulated by sounds originating in your meat larynx and pushed over through your flapping tongue and out of your mouth. I'd like to be able to tell you that I made my sword myself, that I, like ancient magicians, dug the ore out of the ground with a shovel I had fashioned myself, and that I smelted the ore in the heat of charcoal I made from wood of a tree I had planted as a young boy and then chopped down myself, or that I hammered the raw metal into a blade, etc. I'd like to be able to share with you the secret magic word I engraved upon its shining blade Shazam! Abracadabra! Or abrahadabra, which would not be a bad one. Or etiquette. That's a family magic word. It's an in joke. It's DuQuette spelled backwards. Etiquette. But I didn't do any of those. I bought my magic sword in an antique store near my home in Costa Mesa, California. Before you chastise me for being lazy and unmagical, I'd like to share with you the circumstances surrounding its acquisition and what my magic sword means to me. How it qualifies to be my sword. Hopefully the story will give you some idea of what these homemade magical weapons are truly about and what you will need to do to create yours. My sword is a beautiful but modest Masonic Knights Templar ceremonial sword made in the United States sometimes between 1893 and 1923. That's what the antique store estimated. There are thousands of them still cluttering the walls of antique stores and attics all over the world, and if you're lucky enough, you can probably still find one for yourself for less than $100. I had been shopping for a good ceremonial sword since I was made master of Haru Raha Lodge, OTO, in January of 1978. Not only is a lightweight sword necessary tool used in all OTO degree initiation ceremonies, but it's also the weapon of the priestess in the Gnostic Mass, the order's publicly celebrated ritual. In other words, both Constance and I need a good sword in the house. I located the sword of my dreams at a local antique store. It was the Masonic Knights Templar Commander's sword in good shape for something at least 80 years old at the time. I'm sure it's well over 100-year-old now. And adorned with esoteric symbols that are just as appropriate to ceremonial magic as they are to Freemasonry. It was the perfect length and weight, and came with its original scabbard, also beautifully and appropriately adorned. It was reasonably priced, but at a time I didn't have the money to buy it. In fact, I didn't have the money to buy most anything. Looking back, I'm happy that I didn't have the funds to just purchase it when I first saw it in the shop, because if I had just thrown it in my shopping cart, that particular sword might never have gotten itself infused with much magic. But I'll get to that part of the story in a second. I need to tell you that my magic sword didn't start out as a sword. First, it was a guitar, a very special guitar. I posted on Facebook today sort of a close-up of the guitar taken just a few months before I had it customized. It was a handsome instrument, the finest I'd ever owned. A 1968 C.F. Martin D28 with a butter-smooth setup and rich response that was just perfect for my then primitive rhythm accompaniment style. I selected it from about a dozen high-end guitars I sampled at Johnny Thompson Music, the legendary store in El Monte, California, that serviced the artists and bands that populated the touring and recording culture of the golden age of popular music. Our producer at Epic Records drove my partner Charlie and me there one afternoon in early 1970 and told us, Pick out whatever you want. I love that guitar and broke it in writing songs and recording 2 singles, an album, and playing more live performances than my hashish-addled years of sex, drugs, and rock and roll will permit me to remember. A friend and a guitar student of mine who happened to be a master woodworker begged me to allow him, for an insanely reasonable price, to inlay the neck and headstock with mother of pearl and abalone shell. He adorned the fret markers with generous double triangles of mother of pearl, and at the 12th fret he placed the Roman numeral 93, XCIII, in iridescent green, blue, and pink abalone shell. On the headstock, he inlaid the abalone shell name of C.F. Martin, which plunged proudly between the rows of gold Schaller tuning posts. The crowning glory of my sweet Martin was the inlaid Egyptian winged solar disk centered at the top of the headstock. Every feather was a separate iridescent piece of mother of pearl or abalone shell, cut and ground individually at different angles and polished so it reflected the light. It reflected light from different directions. So as the guitar moved under the stage lights, the feathers appeared to flutter and dazzle the eye. Did I say it was a handsome guitar? It was breathtaking, and my most precious possession, the apple of my eye and ear. It was coveted by every guitarist who laid eyes on it. In my mind, that guitar was more than anything else, more than my songs, more than my live performances, more than my own talent, real or imagined, even more than my recording career. It defined who and what I was as an artist. It was my Excalibur. But in December of 1978, magic had become my art. I no longer made my living on stage and in the studio. I had overenjoyed the excesses of the aspiring rock star. I was a married man with a beautiful wife and a little son born in 1972. And in spite of the wild and wonderful adventures I had experienced on the road, I really did want to be a good husband and father. The alcohol, the drugs, the ladies ultimately couldn't compete with the love and warmth of my little family. For several years after I said goodbye to music, I worked a string of low-paying technical positions in the medical device manufacturing industry. The jobs barely paid the rent on our little apartment in Costa Mesa, and there was very little left over every month for food. I must confess the DuQuettes owed our existence to the almost supernatural thriftiness of my dear wife, Constance. Christmas that year fell on a Monday. The company I was working for gave us only 1 day off for the holiday. Management waited until the end of the day on Friday, December 22nd, to announce that regrettably there would be no Christmas bonuses that year, or Christmas gifts that year for the hourly employees. Even though the DuQuettes are not Christian, our family loves Christmas and makes the most of the cultural celebration. That year, Constance had brought home an inexpensive little tree strapped to her bicycle. It always looked like she was riding a bicycle home or riding a Christmas tree home. It was gaily decorated and had been emanating its Jovian perfume into our tiny living room for over a week. A handful of small homemade gifts were already wrapped under the tree, but the real gift I was planning to get Constance and little Jean Paul had yet to be purchased. Awaiting the Christmas bonus money, I was not going that was not going to come. I felt pretty much like Bob Cratchit in Dickens' The Christmas uh, Carol, faced with the grim prospect of delivering bad news to his family on Christmas Eve. I sat in my little cubicle at work and wallowed for a few minutes in self-pity. It was not a very dignified attitude for someone who was starting to identify himself as a serious magician. In fact, I didn't feel like much of a magician at all. Poverty had dogged us from the moment I abandoned my recording career in 1972. My real-world jobs to this point had served to barely keep our heads above water. I was hoping this Christmas would be different. A cheery, a festive occasion for Constance and little Jean Paul, like the Christmases my hard-working parents had managed to throw for me and my brother in the 1950s. Then it had occurred to me that I had one asset, one golden treasure that I might sacrifice on the altar of Christmas to save the day. My Martin. Even without the custom inlay work, it was easily worth $1,000. I didn't, however, have time to find a buyer to give me close to what it was worth. It was too precious an item to pawn for just a few dollars, so I set the insanely low figure of $350, the amount I estimated my bonus would have been, and resolved that if I could immediately get that much money for the instrument, I would sell it and go Christmas shopping. I swung by our apartment after work and picked up my precious D28 and drove directly to Coast Music in Costa Mesa. Facebook friend David Gunner, are you listening to this? He was working there just a few months after this, I think. They knew me there. During our recording years, Charlie and I were local Hollywood recording star celebrities. The owner also knew my guitar and was forever suggesting that I sell it to him. Late as it was in the day, the store was still full of customers, mostly professional musicians shopping for supplies for holiday gigs. The owner was happy to see me and lamented the fact that I hadn't been in for a while. I laid the guitar case on the display case and said flatly, "I'm selling my Martin." He looked surprised and genuinely sad. Still, there was a glint of greed in his eyes. "Are you sure about this?" was his first response. I nodded in the affirmative. He sighed and started to open the case. "Okay, I'll write it up and put it on consignment. What's your asking price?" "I don't want to put it on consignment," I told him. "I want to sell it to you right now for $350 in cash." He looked at me in complete disbelief. He flared his nostrils in a not so subtle attempt to sniff out alcohol or drugs on my breath. "I can't do this, Lon." "Give it some thought," he said. "I've given it a lot of thought. It's Christmas Eve. I need $350 for the family's Christmas." He closed the case and said, "Sorry, man, I couldn't live with myself. It's your baby. You don't want to do this. I said, okay, if it'll make you feel better, you can give me the money and throw in a replacement guitar from off the wall. He thought for a moment and said, okay. He then walked over to the wall display of guitars and picked out a beautiful new Gibson J45. Will this do? Sure, I said, if it'll make you feel better. Now, Gibson J45 is a pretty fine instrument, okay, and it represented an extremely generous trade. A few minutes later, I walked out of the store with $350 in cash and a new guitar. I headed straight to the antique store, purchased 2 items, a rocking chair Constance had admired, and my magic sword. Constance and I spent the rest of the magic cash at the toy store. In the spring, I sold the Gibson to a friend, and for the next 29 years, I didn't own or play a guitar. I left the world of music and embarked on the study and practice of ceremonial magic and the associated arts. My sword, my store-bought inexpensive Masonic ceremonial blade, has gotten quite a workout in the last 40 years. I wouldn't dream of trading it in for a new one. It's now almost 50 years. It is my Excalibur, my sting, my no-thung. I carry it in dreams and visions. With it, I've done battle with the dragons of my own nightmares, banished demons, and stormed the gates of heaven. My cheap Masonic sword is the material metaphor of my word. I needed it to find my voice, the voice of my own great work, for which my old Martin guitar was merely the pre-echo. With my sword, I banish the demons of indolence and laziness and invoke the gods of discipline and focus and pierce the mysteries of my own soul until I cut through and found my magical voice, the word of my own great work. A word, every word I write, every sentence, every poem, every book that pours onto the page is my word. My sword is my tongue, my keyboard, my computer, my printer, my telephone, my network of brothers and sisters and friends and colleagues. What's your word? The answer to that question will hand you your magical sword. It's likely that you'll try out many lesser swords before you find the true one. But once again, you have to start somewhere. And there's no time like the present. So, that's my talk today about magic swords. And it's now time for me to stop. I'll see you tomorrow for Saturday morning cartoons. Until then, be good to yourself, be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.